As humans, we have a tendency to compare things for our own curiosity, whether it may be impressive, dangerous, or terrifying, and when speaking of these freaks of nature, nothing fits the bill quite like the saltwater crocodile. Although the Nile crocodile of Africa could also be included in this statement, some people compare these two species to speculate who would win if they collided. And as scary as the Nile croc is, the reality is they are nowhere near as strong, large, and aggressive as their big cousins. Salties have the reputation of being the most dangerous, culling, and unpredictable crocodilian on the planet. With their immense size and ambush capabilities, they are more than capable of taking down prey far larger than themselves, and unfortunately, that puts man on the menu. Most cases of crocodile attacks are one-offs, where a solitary victim is attacked by a single specimen, never to be heard from again. But what would happen if an army of these man-eaters were to act as one superorganism? What if they were to collaborate in a hunting style where stealth and ambush meets numbers by the thousands? Turns out there might be a war from our past that could shed light on this speculation. In the final months of World War II, in the mangrove swamps of a small Burmese island, a battle unfolded that would become legendary and terrifying, the Battle of Ramree Island. But the fight wasn't just man versus man. Nature had its nightmare-fueled stake, where a hidden predator the size of a truck with a bite force equal to a T-Rex laid in ambush, where soldiers would meet one of the most gruesome of fates imaginable. In January of 1945, the allies of the British and Indian forces pushed into Japanese-occupied Burma, which is now Myanmar. The island of Ramree, off the Arakan coast, offered a crucial airfield site to support the mainland advance. Japanese troops had held Ramree since 1942. On the 14th of January 1945, the Allied landing began. The island is long, low, covered in mangrove swamps and channels. The British 26th Indian Infantry Division, together with commandos and engineers, moved in. Over the next weeks, the Japanese were gradually pushed back. By the 9th of February, the main town fell. But about 1,000 Japanese soldiers were isolated in the eastern part of the island and faced a fateful decision: surrender or attempt to retreat through the swamp toward the mainland. That terrain of the mangrove, tidal channels, mud, heat, and insects would become the battlefield of nature and war. On the 24th of February, Reuters war correspondents reported that Japanese soldiers trying to escape Ramree Island were being forced by hunger out of the mangrove swamps, and many had been killed by crocodiles. In Bruce Wright's 1962 collection Wildlife Sketches, Near and Far, the Canadian naturalist and veteran of the Burma campaign, he described the events of the battle, focusing on predation of the Japanese soldiers by the saltwater crocodiles. That night of February 19, 1945, was the most horrible that any member of the motor launch crews ever experienced. The scattered rifle shots in the pitch-black swamp, punctured by the screams of wounded men crushed in the jaws of huge reptiles, and the blurred, worrying sound of spinning crocodiles made a cacophony of hell that has rarely been duplicated on Earth. At dawn, the vultures arrived to clean up what the crocodiles had left. Of about 1,000 Japanese soldiers that entered the swamps of Ramree, only about 20 were found alive. Other writers, including Roger Caras, in his 1964 Dangerous to Man, repeated Wright's version, with Caras stating, "Had the story come from a source other than Bruce Wright, I would be tempted to discount it." The story was incorporated into the Guinness Book of World Records as the worst animal attack ever recorded, due to Wright's statement that of the 1,000 Japanese soldiers that entered the swamps of Ramree, only about 20 were found alive. The presence of crocodiles in the Ramree swamps led other servicemen stationed on the island to believe they were significant in the battle, with one British soldier writing in his diary that when the army landed, they drove the Japanese into the swamps and the crocodiles killed hundreds of them. They used to call the crocodiles the Allies. In his memoir, An Odyssey in War and Peace, Lieutenant General Jack Jacob from the Indian Army recounted his experiences during the battle. over 1,000 soldiers of the Japanese garrison retreated into the crocodile-infested mangrove swamps. We went in with boats and interpreters using loudhailers asking them to come out. Not a single one did. Saltwater crocodiles, some of them well over 20 feet long, frequented these waters. It is not difficult to imagine what happened to the Japanese who took refuge in the mangroves. Crocodiles would be able to detect vibrations like the soldiers splashing and talking. Their integumentary sensory organs and excellent low-light vision make them keen at sensing prey in murky water. They would then position themselves in an ambush pose with only eyes and nostrils above water, minimizing their silhouette, making them almost invisible amongst the mangrove swamp. Once a soldier would be close enough, they would strike explosively, lunging forward and clamping powerful jaws onto a limb, shoulder, or torso. The initial bite is crushing and immobilizing. As crocodiles prefer to drown large prey underwater, the human will be submerged where they can't breathe. Death often occurs within minutes. If the prey is large and struggles, the croc will perform the death roll, which is a rapid axial rotation of their bodies to tear flesh and to disorient the victim, then drag the body underwater. In 2006, Robert Duff, formerly of the 26th Division, recorded an oral history for the BBC. After a few weeks, we managed to push the Japanese to the swamp on the other side of the island, which was full of crocodiles. They decided to take their chances in the swamp rather than surrender. Only a handful came out alive. However, in his 2011 analysis of the Burma campaign, the historian Frank McLean challenged this interpretation, saying that most of all, there is a single zoological problem. If thousands of crocodiles were involved in the massacre, as in the urban jungle myth, how had these ravening monsters survived before, and how were they to survive later? The ecosystem of a mangrove swamp with an exiguous mammal life simply would not have permitted the existence of so many saurians before the coming of the Japanese, as animals are not exempt from the laws of overpopulation and starvation. In 1974, a journalist, George Fraser, reported having asked the Japanese War Office about the crocodile attack and being told that they could not confirm that it had happened. In 2016, Sam Willis, a historian, reported that he had found documents indicating that the Japanese soldiers mostly drowned or were shot and that crocodiles scavenged on their corpses afterwards. In early 2000, a herpetologist, Stephen Platt, visited Ramree Island, where he interviewed residents who had been alive during the war and who had been forced into slave labor by the Japanese. They unanimously discounted any suggestion that large numbers of Japanese fell prey to crocodiles. The only crocodile-related deaths occurred when 10 to 15 soldiers were killed trying to ford Min Chong, a tidal creek. And he concluded that although the deaths of nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers during the Battle of Ramree Island are well documented and undisputed, there is little need to invoke crocodile predation. Platt published a historiographical analysis of the allegations of the crocodile attack. He established that Bruce Wright had not been on Ramree Island during the battle and noted that although the other chapters in Wright's book were told in the first person, the account of the battle was in the third person. Possibly, Platt speculated, Wright was repeating stories he had been told by friends. Platt also noted that Wright did not attribute the majority of Japanese casualties to crocodile predation, but wrote that only 20 out of 1,000 Japanese soldiers survived the battle, with crocodiles being just one of many hazards. Platt's findings are similar to sections of Wright's 1968 book, The Frogmen of Burma, which chronicled his experiences commanding the Sea Reconnaissance Unit, or the SRU. In the memoir, Wright described how he arrived on Ramree after the main battle had been concluded. Interviewing other members of the SRU, Wright reported that 2 of the men abandoned their paddleboards during the battle and climbed up a mangrove tree to avoid a crocodile. There they heard shouting and rifle fire during the night, far from the Allied position. Vultures often appeared over areas British forces had never reached. Wright concluded the Japanese did not die from crocodiles alone, but also from thirst and wounds. Today, Saltwater crocodiles are no longer reported in large numbers on Ramree Island. Decades of hide hunting and habitat change have all but extirpated them in that region. For historians, Ramree serves as a caution. Terrain and nature can be just as deadly as enemy fire. For naturalists, it reminds us of human vulnerability when we enter wild terrain unprepared. The myth of the crocodile massacre may be exaggerated, but the horror of the swamp mud, heat, disease, fear was real. And the idea that an army might be undone not only by another army, but by an ecosystem resonates across human history. We remember Ramree not just as a battle, but as an intersection where war, nature, and myth collided in one of the most chilling episodes of the 20th century. It is important to keep in mind that these attacks on people from crocodilians are not due to an animal's hatred toward mankind, but in reality is a creature using their instincts in order to survive. Unfortunately, many of us see crocodiles as ruthless killers that show no remorse. There is no surprise why they are on our list of the most dangerous animals to humans, as we often use the water for public recreation, when we are really just infiltrating their territory and natural behavior, which sometimes accumulates to that fact that we just so happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. And on that muddy island off Burma, in the last chapters of World War II, thousands of lives were lost. Not merely by bullets, but by the jungle's ruthless vacuum. Ramree Island stands as a testament, a reminder that in war, nature is never just background. She is an active player. Until next time, on Wild Wisdom.